The decision made, Hiram Clausen confided to his journal the amount of payoffs delivered to American newspapers.
The New York Times, $10,000. The New York Sun, $10,000. The New York Evening Post.
And it's amazing how fast public opinion toward the church changed in the late 1880s. It was an important movement. The church paid out at least $150,000, perhaps in 2 different years, to subsidize newspapers to be more fair to them. It wasn't really a dishonest thing. It was a common thing at the time.
Newspapers in New York, Philadelphia, Chicago, and San Francisco suddenly fell silent on the Mormon question. But a major cash donation to the re-election campaign of Grover Cleveland backfired when Cleveland was beaten by Benjamin Harrison, and Congress was not about to repeal its attacks against the Mormon Church. The battle for the hearts and minds of the nation, by whatever means necessary, was only a small part of the big picture for the Mormon Church and the Utah Territory. Statehood was still far from reach, and the struggle for the future of the territory was ready to reach its peak. On July 30th, 1887, the U.S. Attorney for the Territory of Utah filed suit against the Mormon Church to seize church property. Federal deputies swept down on church offices, raiding the President's office, the Tithing Office, the Office of the Perpetual Emigrating Fund, that church-run organization that had brought tens of thousands of immigrants to the territory. They seized every financial record they could identify. The deputies occupied Gardo House, built by Brigham Young and used by President John Taylor as an official residence. They raided the Endowment House, the site of ceremonies sacred to the Mormon people, including marriages. The deputies prowled Temple Square and spoke openly of the day they would seize the temples.
It is strange that men of education should imagine that wresting from the Mormons their church property would have any effect upon a single feature of their religion. If the church were stripped of every vestige of wealth, if all its places of worship were destroyed, if it were left without a dollar of money, it would remain as strong and united and full of force. The united faith and devotion of its members are more than money and mightier than earthly possessions. The Deseret News.
But the bluster could not hide the fact that the raids were precipitating a financial crisis for the Mormon Church, with deep implications for 70% of the territory's population. As if to illustrate the religious conflict that threatened to tear the Utah Territory apart, a delegation of non-Mormon women had made their way to Washington under the leadership of Angie Newman.
And her concern was that Mormon women were in effect brainwashed into their religion, and that we should not be angry with them or try to fight against them, but that we should look upon them as a cause in which we can rescue them from the shackles that bind them in this terrible condition of plural marriage. So let's find a way for them, she said, to give them some reprieve from this, because they have nowhere to go. They're stuck in these bonds.
The women urged Congress to fund, in effect, a federal rescue mission for the wives of polygamy.
It's a well-known fact that there are many who would voluntarily abandon polygamous relations if facilities for self-support were provided. Angie F. Newman.
Congress funded what was known as the Women's Christian Industrial Home in Salt Lake City, opened the doors, and waited for the flood of disaffected polygamous wives.
I think the records show that no more than 10 or 15 women at a time, including their children, entered the home. It was not a successful venture, and of course the Mormons capitalized on the fact that it didn't serve the purposes for which it was established.
It was one of several signs of the resolve of the Mormon people to resist the federal crackdown. George Q. Cannon, a member of the church's ranking first presidency, went to prison for 5 months on charges stemming from polygamy. But one of the most powerful messages from these years in the cauldron came from the underground. In July 1887, church president John Taylor died in hiding. At this time of conflict tearing at the future of the Mormon Church and the Utah Territory, spiritual leadership passed to 80-year-old Wilford Woodruff. years had passed since the first pioneers entered the Salt Lake Valley. More than 200,000 people now called the Utah Territory home. Salt Lake City had entered a new era. The first telephone exchanges were serving the downtown business district. Public transportation moved people through the busy streets and serviced the growing financial community. Higher education had taken a great leap forward, with the University of Deseret graduating its first class in 1886. Brigham Young Academy in Provo was soon to enter its own new building on Academy Square. But every corner of life in the territory was under the cloud of the conflict between the federal government and the Mormon Church. It even stretched to Idaho, where the territory had instituted its own test oath to bar all Mormons from political participation, prompting the Mormons of Bear Lake to protest to the president.
It is un-American to prescribe and disfranchise any citizen for merely belonging to any sect or organization. Our case is a desperate one and demands immediate attention.
But President Benjamin Harrison demanded a hard and fast Mormon statement renouncing plural marriage before he would consider a lenient course. And Church President Wilford Woodruff sent dramatically mixed signals. First, in 1888.
We are not going to stop the practice of plural marriage until the coming of the Son of Man.
And then reversing direction in 1889.
I have refused to give any recommendations for the performance of plural marriage since I have been president, and have instructed they should not be solemnized.
Congress rejected the confusion of the statements, along with Utah's latest bid for admission to the Union.
It is the sense of the Senate that the territory of Utah ought not to be admitted into the Union as a state until it is certain beyond doubt that the practice of plural marriage, bigamy, and polygamy has been entirely abandoned by the inhabitants of the territory, and until it is likewise certain that the civil affairs of the territory are not controlled by the priesthood of the Mormon Church. The Committee on Territories, U.S. Senate.
What brought about the end of the impasse was the fact that Wilford Woodruff was faced with not just the potential, but the reality that the federal government would grind Mormonism to dust over this issue of the continued practice of polygamy. And by 1890, it became clear that the federal government was in the process. It wasn't just going to one day, it was already dismantling Mormonism piece by piece.
Wilford Woodruff, the Mormon Church, and the Utah Territory were at a crossroads as the decade came to an end.
Thus ends the year 1889, and the word of the prophet Joseph Smith is beginning to be fulfilled, that the whole nation would turn against Zion and make war upon the saints. The nation has never been so full of lies against the saints as today. 1890 will be an important year with the Latter-day Saints and the American nation.
Next time on Utah, the struggle for statehood. Wilford Woodruff faces a monumental decision as the future of the Mormon people and the Utah Territory hangs by a thread. His proclamation to the world opens a dramatic new chapter in the territory's history, begins the healing of old wounds, and breaks the deadlock with the federal government in a stunning reversal of fortune. 45 stars, next time on Utah, the struggle for statehood.